In my last video, we looked at some major themes of the Old Testament, two being the theme of covenants and the theme of God's sovereignty. Now in this video, what we're going to take a look at exactly how those themes fit into the overall narrative of the Bible. And when we say the overall narrative of the Bible is God's redemption plan for his creation. So how does that fit? How does the theme of covenants fit into this overall narrative? Well, Jesus is the fulfillment of that first covenant that we talked about, the Adamic covenant, where God said, I will provide, there will be an offspring that comes from Eve, and he will crush the head of the serpent, and the serpent will bruise his heel. But what I find most intriguing is that not only is Jesus the fulfillment of the Adamic covenant, but he is the fulfillment of all the covenants that we see in the Old Testament, right? We talked about the Adamic covenant, the covenant he made with Noah, the Noahic covenant, or not the covenant that he made with Noah, but the Noah covenant is that he provided that rainbow. If you look in the scriptures, he provided the rainbow as a signature of his promise that he will spare all creation. He won't flood the earth. He won't punish creation for what man has done, right? And so that rainbow represented that promise that he would spare creation, right? But in turn, we see Jesus is the fulfillment of that covenant, because he spares the creation, but he takes on the full, Jesus takes on the full penalty that man deserves for their sin. And that Abrahamic covenant, he is that promised offspring that would be a blessing to all the nations. In the Mosaic covenant, Jesus is that prophet that Moses spoke about. God would raise up a prophet amongst the Israelites, and they are to follow him. They are to listen to him. Jesus fulfills that covenant. Jesus also fulfills the covenant of the Davidic covenant, where God told David, you will have a descendant king who will reign as king forever. Who will be a descendant and who will be in your lineage, and he will be king forever. That is Jesus. How does sovereignty, the theme of sovereignty, fit also in this overall narrative? Well, Israel, throughout the Bible, we see, especially in the Old Testament, we see that they constantly breach their covenant with God. As a result, Israel had rocky life and rocky events as a consequence to them constantly breaching this covenant. They experienced a split of their kingdom, where you have Israel, you have Judah. They experienced death, loss, and battles. But one of the key elements that they experience is exile, right? They experienced their temple being destroyed, Jerusalem being destroyed, and them being exiled to a foreign land and having to live in a foreign land. But we also see the hope and the redemption and all that when they leave exile and they go back into their own land, and they kind of go through this rebuilding thing. But in all of that, despite what they have done to breach the covenant, on God's side, God has always been that faithful redeemer, because he has been faithful to the covenant all along. He's never breached the covenants, the many covenants that he has laid out in the Old Testament. But at the same time, he also is a redeemer, because he redeems the people, even though they broke and breached the covenant that they also made with God. He redeems them, brings them back into relationship time and time again. But this all reminds me of the current state that we're in right now, the moral decline that we see in society, the political climate that we have here in the U.S., the racial climate that we have all around the world. And not only that we have COVID-19 and the many deaths that has resulted of this disastrous virus. But I'm reminded of John chapter 15, verse 33, where Jesus said to his disciples, in the world you will have tribulation, but he says, but take heart, I have overcome the world. So this all brings us back to the overall narrative, which we saw in the Old Testament, despite what the Israelites done and what they went through and what was going on in the world, all the turmoil, right? God was still a faithful Redeemer. The same thing is now, despite everything that we are experiencing right now in the world, all the trouble that we see, all the war, all the sickness, all the greed, even global warming, despite all of that, everything is still pointing to a resulting end of hope that God will redeem his elect and they will experience him and be with him in relationship forever in the new creation.